Big topic today on the Know Your Rights Camp podcast. We're talking about surveillance, whether that's from the government or private corporations, websites, apps, snitch tech, all of this new technological apparatus that has changed the way we can live our lives without the government or Big Brother looking in at us.
I like that, snitch tech. I mean, I don't like the snitch tech, but I think that's the most concise way to describe everything that's going on. And I think what's interesting is that as much as all of us live on our phones, live on our laptops, our tablets, whatever, what have you, we have all this technology and we're aware of its capabilities, but I don't think we really have a clear understanding of how much technology is being used for surveillance of the everyday person.
Right. I mean, it's so much data being collected. The government has the capacity literally to tap into our phones right now and listen to the microphone. And we know that they're actually doing this with some citizens. And there's a whole snitch tech industrial complex, billion-dollar industry collecting and surveilling information.
Right. And I think we spoke about this before we started talking, is that, you know, people are saying like, oh, I don't see any government contracts that have to do with surveillance. You don't see government contracts because, to make it clear, even though a lot of people years and years, decades ago were saying, hey, the government's getting a little too all up in the citizens' business, and let's put a halt to any sort of spending or any sort of trying to create technology to surveil the American people, but we didn't look at private companies.
Right.
And in the true capitalistic American way, a lot of tech companies in the U.S. are spending a lot of money creating this snitch tech, as you refer to it.
Yeah, and it's not even just the system of capitalism, because these capitalistic companies, IBM and other tech companies, they're actually doing major contracts with the government of China and others to create this surveillance and repress citizens, you know, not just in China, but it's being exported all over.
So when we talk about surveillance, what are we talking about? We're talking about not just, I think everyone makes a joke like, oh, to the FBI guy on my phone, you know. But I think when we talk about surveillance, we mean drones. We mean using facial recognition and making sure that we're fine-tuning facial recognition to recognize people of certain ethnicities from certain countries, right? Or we're talking about technology that makes it so that we can, you know, get the GPS, not just off people's phones, but from their Ring cameras, for, you know, if they wear a smartwatch. We're talking about technology like having databases for DNA and being able to, you know, scan them quickly.
Right. License plate scanners.
License plate scanners, which are being used in, you know, a lot of cities now. So when we say surveillance, I think a lot of people automatically think like, oh, a hidden camera.
Right.
But it's more than that. It's getting more and more invasive, and that's what the issue is.
Yeah, as technology evolves and as AI creates new ways to streamline information, the government and private companies are coming up with different ways, creative ways to be Big Brother.
Yeah.
So to provide a little more historical context, in the 1960s, President Johnson floated the idea of this quote-unquote national data bank. And it was to consolidate all this personal data, and it actually sparked a lot of privacy debates, and it allowed for people to pass what's now called the Privacy Act of 1974. But like you mentioned, this focused on the government collecting data and information, and pretty much corporations like IBM, Dell, Cisco, and others stepped in to fill the void, not fill the void, but to do what was problematic with the government doing directly. And now these private companies are doing it and contracting it directly with the government.
And because they did it in such a stealthy way, when people thought, oh, we have this Privacy Act, we don't realize that the Privacy Act is very specific to the government and not for any private entities. And if you think about it, with my iPhone alone, I have given my face, I've given perhaps a fingerprint. You know, people sign things on their phones. And so where is that going? We sort of just move along like, well, I need it to unlock my phone. I need it to do this.
Right.
And so we're not thinking about privacy when it comes to these private companies the same way we're thinking of privacy when it comes from the government.
Right.
But now the government is using that technology, so where do we go from here?
Exactly. All that biometric data you're talking about with fingerprints and faces that's being collected by cameras all over the country as well.
Yeah.
I mean, it's come out that corporations like Ring and, Amazon and others basically give the police access to the cameras directly, sometimes without warrants or without going through the proper process. This is troubling because we're supposed to live in this free country, right?
Yeah.
Where our government doesn't have the ability to come into our house, to look into our private lives. But it appears as though that can happen easily. And you're seeing it used as an apparatus against certain communities more than others.
Yeah. And then, a lot of people, there was a trend to do the 23andMe, to do their ancestry, send in DNA. It's a little reminiscent of, what you spoke about earlier, people being afraid of this national database. But even if it's not going to a national database because one doesn't exist in that way, well, if the government can very easily go to these companies and say, hand it over, and those companies are saying, oh, okay.
Right. And it came out that 23andMe was basically directly giving that information to police. Yeah. Whereas Ancestry.com, they actually say and have a policy that says they do not cooperate with law enforcement.
I didn't even know that.
Unless they have to with the warrants and different things, but they're just not handing over your biometric data or your DNA data.
23andMe.
Yeah.
But, I laugh, but it's also because it's so normal.
Right.
And I think that's something that we need to sort of hit home is that the surveillance is normal to us.
It's so normalized. I mean, technology and information is just there, but we're not realizing that when you're shopping on Amazon, they're collecting information. When you send an email, they send information. I mean, you ever notice sometimes you're talking about something and then you get a text message offer?
Yeah.
Oh, you thinking about a vacation in Cabo?
Yeah.
Like, was someone just listening to me talk to my friend about a vacation in Cabo?
Yeah, and that's AI, and that's, we joke the FBI guy on my phone, but it's AI, so maybe the FBI guy is handling the AI, but, and for some, that sounds like, oh, you're sounding like conspiracy theorists, but I think there are actual concrete examples of this surveillance, and the surveillance not just all over the world. I think it's come out recently that around 2014 to 2019, there was this unrest in China that not a lot of people know about. Basically, there were some ethnic minorities in China in certain provinces that the national government wanted to suppress. They wanted, they were a religious minority, they were an ethnic minority.
Yeah, the Uyghur Muslims, right?
And to do that, they used a lot of surveillance. They used surveillance to be able to determine who was an ethnic minority versus the majority. They used it to identify based on facial recognition whether they were of a certain ethnic group. They used it to tag DNA so that they called it predictive profiling. So they're profiling you before you even do anything wrong, if you even do anything wrong, because they're assuming that your race or your ethnicity means a proclivity towards doing something wrong. And all of this technology was created by American companies. And American companies, they're saying like, oh, we didn't know. And we're talking about IBM, Cisco, these huge Silicon Valley corporate entities. But this was what was used, and it's sort of, it's sort of a cautionary tale because between 2014 and 2019, the surveillance was used to suppress people of a specific group.
Right.
A certain minority, certain religious beliefs, certain language, certain, essentially their skin tone's a certain color. And they were put into detainment camps. And this is all sounding a little familiar for those all around the world and right now in the United States.
Yeah, it's interesting as technology evolves. Corporations come up with more creative ways to repress and surveil instead of help and support people.
Yeah.
But there's so many disturbing trends happening right now with surveillance. I have a list of just a few things going on that I want to share. And we already talked about a few, but, home camera access via Ring and Amazon. So police partners directly with these organizations, with these corporations to access this information streamlined so they can tap into your neighborhood and elsewhere. Facial recognition technology from the Department of Motor Vehicle and social media. So your license plate picture, your face picture that you take at
That
the motor
selfie
vehicle.
when you just were feeling good is now being used in a database.
Exactly.
Wow.
So they're tracking movement around, and ICE and the FBI are directly using that to try to access we know who. There are these fusion centers sharing data locally. There's over 70 fusion centers that are just funneling police data, whether it's license plates,
Wow.
social media, and others, into these huge databases that the Department of Homeland Security use to disproportionately target communities of color. Specifically, a lot of immigrant communities are being targeted with this. I mean, we talked about this a little bit, but a big thing that's happening right now is on the smartphones, this graphite technology that ICE is using and others, but basically ICE can hack into encrypted apps that we thought were safe, like, WhatsApp and Signal and others, along with tapping into the microphones of our phones and other things through this graphite technology that came from a place that's known to repress people. And so the U.S. is actually importing these technologies.
Yeah, so not only do we have homegrown surveillance, we also have surveillance technology from other countries. So graphite especially is being used a lot in the Middle East. It was engineered by an Israeli company, and so it's being used there. It's going to be used here. And I think it's important to note that it's ICE that's using it, especially at this point in time. We talked about China a little bit earlier, and we said, like, hey, they're using surveillance to suppress a certain group. And that's what we're seeing right now is, there was a Supreme Court ruling earlier this week as we're recording that said that, you can use race, language, where people are congregating, and what someone's job is to racially profile in order to detain someone. And this is directed towards ICE and Border Patrol. Well, how do they figure out where people are congregating?
Right.
Where are they figuring out if somebody fits a certain ethnic profile? How are they figuring out where people are working? It's all this data they're collecting, and it's all surveillance. And so the fact that the Supreme Court just gave the green light to say that if you are brown, if you have a job that is quote unquote brown, if you congregate with other brown people, if you speak a language that is not English, that is okay now for ICE and Border Patrol to stop you and detain you until you can prove your immigration status. But they're getting this information via surveillance.
Exactly. That was a very troubling ruling that are forcing communities to live in a world where it's a show me your papers kind of reality. And this apparatus of surveillance will be used to look into Home Depot cameras, to look at license plates and other things and create racist assumptions about what a person does. Seeing someone driving a truck, if they're brown, this court ruling says, that's enough reason to pull them over.
This court ruling also says if you're not speaking English and you're congregating with other people who are also not speaking English, that's an okay reason for you to be detained. Well, maybe you're not going to see ICE, driving down to see what language people are speaking, but you don't know how else they're getting that information.
Right.
Yeah. So again, it's surveillance. And, I know we're talking about surveillance, but I think we should talk a little bit about what the Supreme Court said and why.
Well, they didn't say much, for one.
Well, exactly. I think there's some confusion about this ruling. So it starts with what was a temporary restraining order in the Southland of California, in the LA area, to stop what were called roving patrols. So basically ICE agents walking around trying to find groups of people that look like they're of a Latino descent and immigrant descent, but specifically Latino. And they were using factors like where they work. So are they a day laborer at Home Depot? Are they at a car wash? They used these quote unquote low paying jobs as a marker of ethnicity. Are they speaking in language that's not English? Are they congregating in these areas? That's why we talk about that. It went up, it kept getting stayed, and it went to the 9th District, and they actually kind of refused to rule on it. So it went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, which of course is backed by justices that are all right because they were put in place by Trump and others, they decided to lift the temporary restraining order.
Right.
So there was no actual opinion, no written opinion about the right to use racial profiling. They just said we're removing the racial profiling aspect. There was a really well-written dissent by Sotomayor, one of the liberal justices, saying, basically what we're saying is that this gives free rein for racial profiling. But for those that are confused, it just lifted the temporary restraining order. It didn't actually make a ruling on racial profiling as a whole.
Right.
And so actually, as of the date of this recording, there are further proceedings.
Yeah.
And people will be going to court. People are going to keep fighting based on the fact that there's more and more government actions to be used as evidence of both profiling and the surveillance.
Exactly.
And so that's why we're talking about that today.
The fight and the battle, and the march continues.
Yes.
But it was a very troubling ruling that didn't even provide justification as to why they're going in the opposite direction of many other cases in precedent. And I want to read some of those quotes from Justice Sotomayor, who spoke out against this in the dissenting opinion, which was actually some of the only words written about this rulings. So she called it unconscionable and irreconcilable with our nation's constitutional guarantees. We should not have to live in a country where the government can seize anyone who looks Latino, speaks Spanish, and appears to work in a low-wage job, Sotomayor wrote. And basically, that's what this does. This legalizes racial discrimination, harassment, targeting, and other things that happen informally, and we know have been happening when we look at this, the disparities, but now there's just free reign on it.
Yeah, and it's terrifying for a lot of people, regardless of your immigration status. It's terrifying because, we've already seen that prior to this, with these roving patrols, that people who just appear to look a certain way were getting detained, even if they were U.S. citizens, even if they were born here, naturalized, they had their paperwork.
Right.
And then there are even folks who are going through the process who have no reason to be detained. And I think Mayor Bass spoke about it, is that this is troubling, not just for Southern California, but because this sets a precedent for all the other cities that are going to be hit next or being, targeted now. Their eyes are on Chicago right now. Eyes are on D.C. Eyes are on all these huge areas. And something that was said at a press conference in L.A. by some of the local organizations that have been trying to work with, immigrant populations is, well, they're coming for this group of immigrants first, but then they're going to go after other people next. Right. And so, right now it's about, are you brown and speaking Spanish? But who knows what the next group is? We've seen it be, are you Muslim and going to a mosque? It could be, are you Asian and speaking an Asian language? It can go back to being indigenous. It can go back, and as always, there's always going to be surveillance and racial profiling of Black people. That's not stopped. So, the fact that this is still going, the fact that surveillance is ongoing, it's troubling, to say the least.
It seems like this country is creating this apparatus that allows for them to do different things, to snatch people off the street, to violate our constitutional rights, and they're redefining what those rights are through opinions like these. And through these different technologies with surveillance, they're streamlining ways to basically surveil people and snatch them off the street.
Yeah, and they're pretty innocuous, and I think I keep, talking about that. Somebody said that even Spotify is flagging what you're listening to and like playlists you're creating, and so, and that is innocuous because some people listen to things just for whatever reason. Some people don't even know the lyrics of the things that they're listening to. And so, if they're using all of these little touch points, it's scary because, we saw in other countries that they're, trying to tag people as potential threats before anything's even done, before there's even any other proof, threats just because they listened to something, because they liked a post on Instagram, because they reposted a TikTok, because they're a certain color, ethnicity, they have certain status. And that's sort of where it's hard, because how do you know your rights if you don't even know if you have any anymore?
Exactly. You have to be careful when signing up and
Yeah.
agreeing to those user agreements in Spotify where it says they're collecting all these information. Not just Spotify, it could be YouTube, it can be any service.
Yeah, it could be Meta.
Especially Meta.
Especially Meta.
It's interesting. Meta uses our data and information in so many ways. I think the average person doesn't know. I mean, they're using your actual images to create and generate AI images, but they're also using it to inform their algorithms. They're using it to sell to marketers. They use the average person's information probably 100 times over between different corporations they sell it to or market it to. So we have to be careful and protect our data.
Yeah. And then I think recently there is an Instagram group that is, or StopIce.net, they just were informed by Meta that Meta received a subpoena from a federal agency, presumably the FBI, about information that they are posting or using. And so, it's out there, information's out there. It's just about going through the channels to get it. And it seems like the government tends to be winning when it comes to obtaining that information.
Mm-hmm. Let's bring some other good news and talk about other troubling ways the government is all up in our business.
Yeah.
And I think, and it depends on the state you're in too.
Yeah.
For example, when I lived in Florida, the state of Florida, the government would sell your information to people. The information that comes up when someone types in your name in Google, like your address and different things. The state of Florida, the government is actually profiting off that. But let's talk about drone surveillance at protests. So Predator drones, this military equipment in operation, are being used to monitor protests in cities like LA and raising major First Amendment concerns.
Yeah.
And they're using the drones, they're using the data from the drones combined with phone and GPS location data to target certain people.
Yeah, I remember, as I said before, I go to all these protests as a legal observer. I remember getting a notification that the Predator drone had been deployed multiple times.
Wow.
In the course of a week. And I've seen, police drones. I've seen local enforcement use like basic drones. I've heard of the Predator drone being used. And we've also heard of people being arrested because of that, or detained or questioned because of that. And these were at protests. Peaceful or not, they were protests, and they were within their rights to protest.
Right.
And so deploying a Predator drone just because you knew there was a protest scheduled is saying a lot about what they think of protests, which are within our rights.
Exactly.
And so if they're deploying the Predator drone to surveil citizens or just folks in this country, exercising their right to protest, imagine, what they're going to do if they think that, they're already sort of in their head criminalizing what's supposed to be a right.
And luckily, there's some resistance to that, even within lawmakers.
Yeah.
So Representative Gomez, who represents LA here in DC, is actually pushing for federal legislation to limit the use of Predator drones in protests. There's a councilwoman in LA who's also raising concern. Ulysses Hernandez is also raising issues about it. And so luckily, some lawmakers are trying to put parameters around it, but law enforcement departments, federal agencies, and others are already off the chain and off the leash with this.
Yeah, and off the leash is the best way to put it, because, it's interesting because we're seeing folks like scrambling to know their rights and to enforce them, but it's hard when the actual entities that are supposed to enforce or know your rights are slowly like trying to take them away.
Right.
And so I think it's good that we shine light on everything that's happening, because we've talked about this before, that, you can sort of reclaim your rights and expand your rights as long as you keep pushing for them. And even in the midst of all this, like, people are still fighting. There's a silver lining, not much of one, but there is one. And I think it's important to remember that that's still happening.
Oh, no, we're going to constantly resist. And we've been talking about Big Brother since Big Brother has been there. We've always known who was watching. And it's just they're evolving in the ways in which they do watch us. Another disturbing trend is the license plate readers, ALPRs sometimes called. So these capture billions of driver scans, and they're stored for years and often used for immigrant tracking.
I have a story about that one, personal story. So they use that in Culver City, which is not too far from where we're recording. Culver City is where my parents live. Culver City started using plate readers in 2021. So this was a couple of years ago. They were Culver City is a small city, and they love their surveillance. They in the 2020, I had been detained, arrested for protests related to the George Floyd uprising, right? I got stopped, even though I have no record other than arrest, because all of that was like thrown away. I never was convicted of anything because charges were never pressed against me. I was stopped by Culver City Police several times, and I continue to be stopped by Culver City Police because the minute I cross into Culver City, my plate gets red and I get pulled over.
Wow.
So I always had to make sure that I'm following every rule, every blinkers on, anything, and they would stop me, ask where I'm going, et cetera, to the point where I just, now I have like my parents' address. I'm like, this is where I'm going.
Yeah.
So I've had it happen multiple times, but I'm someone that doesn't have a record. I've had arrests, but no charges. I might be known for my work with the National Lawyers Guild and advocacy, which, by the way, are the reasons I was arrested. So, but even then, I'm someone and I'm a U.S. citizen, so I don't have to worry about anything but harassment, which isn't great.
Right.
But then you have to think about the people who do have to worry.
Yeah.
The people who maybe they're in the process of getting their immigration. Maybe they're not a citizen. Maybe they have a record, but maybe their record is trivial.
Yeah.
Like if I had something to worry about, I can only imagine how a more vulnerable person feels.
Right. Imagine. I mean, and just think about the average citizen who just wants to be free from the government watching everywhere they're going.
Yeah.
Even if you're not hiding something, you just don't want somebody looking behind your back. I'm thinking about that song from the 80s. I'm always feel like somebody's watching me. With my, it was a banger, right? But I don't want that to be my life.
I don't want it to be my life. Exactly.
I don't want people just kind of creeping out behind
and that's
the
kind
shadows.
of what it feels like at this point.
Oh, no, this government, especially folks like us doing the work we do, we know we're being watched.
I have most ridiculous stories. I do actually, sometimes LAPD HQ checks my Instagram story. I think they forget to use a different account. They looked at it the other day. I hope they like the picture of my dog.
Nice. All up in your stories.
Yeah.
All right, some other troubling things we want to just inform people about. The predictive policing algorithms. So Palantir and IBM and others, they're using all of this data and surveillance to, quote unquote, predict criminality and often flagging Black and Latino and people of color residents disproportionately in these algorithms.
That was a bad movie. I can't remember the name of the movie, but it was a movie about predictive policing. Minority Report,
Tom Cruise in it?
Yeah, it was. Yeah. I was like, this is the movie Minority Report, which was called Minority Report.
Exactly.
And at the time, it was like, oh, this is a thriller. But then you stop and think about it, you go, this is terrible. And even in the movie, it's described as terrible. And the idea was that was supposed to be a movie. It was supposed to be so fantastic it wouldn't happen. But here we are. It's actually the Minority Report now. Yeah. And the idea of predictive policing is so inherently racist.
Yeah.
There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Like predicting based on what?
Right. Well, I mean, as the Supreme Court case says, predicting based off race, language where you work,
which is so ridiculous because, we can go into it, but predictive policing could also be looking at the people in the top 1%.
Right.
But they're not looking at those people.
And where the hell is this predictive policing with the mass shooters and white supremacists?
Right, exactly.
Doing all of that.
So, but just the idea of predictive policing is basically sentencing someone before they've even shown themselves to be any sort of way. Innocent till proven guilty, but predictive policing, that can't exist at the same time.
Yeah, it reminds me of like these preemptive wars that we live in the U.S. where we're striking because they might strike, you know, and that's been the USO's motto with war for a long time. And now it's being used to wage war on citizens.
Yeah.
I want to share one last piece of information related to the surveillance apparatus. So geofence and location, data warrants sometimes.
Yeah.
So police can request through Google and other tech data everyone's location near a mosque, near a rally, near a protest, near other places. So just from your phone, carrying your phone around. I mean, this is why, sometimes I'm told if I'm going somewhere, put my phone on airplane mode at
Yeah.
certain protests and different things, if I
Yeah.
can safely do so,
Yeah.
because this geo data that they're tracking
Yeah.
is often just shared with law enforcement.
Wow. And, it's interesting because some people could be innocently nearby. What if they work nearby?
Well,
You
I think
know?
most people are
Yeah,
probably innocent.
most
And it's not a
people.
crime to be at a protest anyway, right?
Exactly,
So
yeah.
I think they're all innocent.
Yeah.
And the government should just mind their damn business.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Again, predictive policing doesn't work
right.
because it's interesting because so many times police are criticized because they don't actually stop anything from happening.
Right.
They usually show up after the fact,
Yeah.
right? In terms of community safety, communities keep communities safe, and then when something happens, police show up after. So the idea that they want to do predictive policing when they can't necessarily do the actual policing all that well,
Yeah.
it calls into question, like, what are the tactics? Who are we targeting, right?
Yeah.
We're not targeting people who have necessarily done anything wrong with predictive policing. It's just more profiling, and profiling is so problematic and
Yeah.
dangerous. It's dangerous.
It sounds like one of those people, like fortune tellers, who
Yeah.
can't tell you what
Yeah.
things are right now, but can tell you the future some
Right.
magical way. And
Yeah, because you don't have to. Predictive policing, if you stop someone before they do something because nothing happens, you're saying, we won.
Yeah.
But
No, it's entrapment.
That's
It's many
entrapment.
things.
Yeah, it's just the math isn't mathing,
Right.
It's just, it doesn't make sense. And it's just, you're a lawyer, you hate this phrase, but it's a slippery slope.
Mm-hmm.
It just means that we're opening the floodgates to more predictive policing tactics, more surveillance, and, considering how it feels very lawless right now, it somehow feels like it's going to get even more. So,
Right.
yeah.
So we definitely recommend that people stay vigilant out there, read those user agreements,
Yeah.
pay attention to the ways in which even your own security camera system might be sharing that
Yeah.
information directly with law enforcement.
Yeah.
Even, I had to deactivate the phone unlocking with my face on my
Yeah.
camera,
Yeah.
just because that's a security measure, but we definitely recommend folks
Yeah.
remain vigilant.
And, pay attention. Technology is so ingrained in our lives and so necessary most of the time that we're not even paying attention to all the data it collects. And we're not saying that you have to go, tinfoil hat and go completely off the grid. But we are saying, pay attention to what's happening in other countries. Pay attention to what's happening in the past because it's going to come back, especially right now with everything going on. So just, I guess that's what we say it all the time, but there's nothing wrong with saying it more and often. It's stay vigilant. Yeah.
Watch out for the snitch tech.
You watch out for the snitch tech. Yeah. We covered a lot today, including an ongoing Supreme Court case. That means we'll be coming to you with more information as we get it. So please follow us at knowyourrightscamp.org.